Welcome to the Women Inspire Aspire podcast. In this episode, I talk to Madhur Singh about climate journalism. Hi Madhur, thank you for accepting my invite to appear in the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Venkat. How have you been?
I'm doing good. I was busy with the International Women's Day 2026 celebrations at our podcast. Pretty eventful day today, March 8th.
That's nice. That's a good Sunday. I've also had a full day working towards launching my website in about 4 weeks from now. And yeah, just winding down, having a chat with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making time to appear in the podcast. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to have you at the podcast. So let's get started by talking a bit about yourself, where you're from, what do you do, etc.
Yeah, sure. I am a journalist. That's what I've done for all of my working life, now running on to about 25 years, which surprises me as well. Shocks me when I think about it, a quarter of a century. Where am I from? That's a little difficult to answer because my father was in a transferable job. I became a journalist and traveled for work as well as for studies. And then I married an army officer. So I pretty much changed cities every few years all of my life. We now live in Bangalore. We've been here for about 3 years. Yeah, that's all I can say by way of where am I from. I quite take pride in having been Rolling Stone that gathers no moss but gets a certain polish. Other than that, I've spent about half of my working career with the Indian media and the other half with the international media. I've covered climate, environment, renewables since the late 20 noughties. During this time, I've worked at Time Magazine, at Bloomberg Law, or rather an organization that eventually became Bloomberg Law, many years at the World Economic Forum. I've run websites, including India Spend and Fact Checker, served two stints ages ago, two stints each at the Indian Express and the Hindustan Times. I think that sums it up. Yeah, and now I'm on course in about 4 weeks to launch a climate solutions journalism website.
Interesting. Makes me think that you should have become a travel journalist than a climate journalist. But yeah, very interesting career. It's fascinating. Let's talk about how you got interested in journalism at the first place.
It's a long and rather complicated story, but I think it'll all fit in place once I start talking about it. Well, so I grew up in Punjab during the insurgency. My father was a civil servant and my mother was a very active person. She was a compeer at Doordarshan Jalandhar for a while. She was also a social worker. A lot of what my parents did at that time was very inspiring for a young person, for a young child, especially my mother. During the peak of insurgency, she organized a Red Cross Mela where about 1 lakh people congregated. They raised a lot of funds. She won the President's Medal. And growing up, I saw her taking on fights where others would just keep quiet, digging her heels in where she wanted to stand her ground, and setting a very positive precedent at a time when women didn't really step out of the house all that much and certainly didn't want to upset the apple cart in any way. So I think she was one of my earliest influences. And then growing up, I found myself doing a lot of that as well. A fair bit of rabble rousing in college and outside, taking up causes. And I guess a lot of all young people do that at some stage or the other, just being rebellious and trying to discover who they are. But I guess in my case, luck played her hand. And towards the end of my second year in college, I found myself an internship at the Hindustan Times in Delhi. When I came back after just about a month and a half, I think, I knew I wanted to do that. This is what I really wanted to do. Reflect society, understand things better for myself, cover things that intrigued me. And this was the late 1990s, a time of immense change. We lived in Chandigarh at that time, I and my family, and the little city was undergoing its own fair share of changes, social changes more than anything else. I was very lucky to find a very good first editor who kind of, I think, took a chance on a rookie like me, spotting trends as they evolved in the city. Really, looking back, that's what it seems like. Very soon, I was doing my own column while still an undergraduate student, a column that essentially was look at various cultural events across the city. But I think what that really allowed us to do was to see how the city was opening up in terms of a very, very nascent pub culture, discotheque culture. You might remember there used to be discos back in the day, how boys and girls were starting to mingle, how fashion shows were a big thing at that time. So how people would come together at fashion shows in a state, in a city that was largely conservative, socially conservative, and how all these changes were playing out. So I think we really had a blast, I and my editor, reflecting on things as they were unfolding. And for me as a young person, I think it was a dream entry into any kind of a job. And certainly for a journalism job, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And that's how it really got started. I didn't look back. Yeah. And I've never had to change my mind. I've always loved what I do.
I'm pretty curious about one thing. You mentioned about young people being rebellious and wanted to do and explore things themselves. How does it relate to journalism? Because journalism is a very structured way of expressing things, right? But the rebel part is unstructured, I would say. How do you make those ends meet?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I would say one of my main motivations to become a journalist was to fight for. I did believe at one point that I was going to fight and solve so many issues. And that's really where my motivation still comes from. What are the changes that, we're all just, a little speck on the blue dot, as we all know. But there's still so much that each one of us can do. So for me, journalism has always been an avenue to reflect societal change and to play a small part in ensuring that change can be positive. So I think that's what I meant by this.
Awesome, I got it. In these days of social media, we see people writing on their own, which is a very creative way of journalism, having the creative control on their own hands, which gives them the freedom of expression, which is a double-edged sword, I would say. Yeah, interesting. So how did you get into climate journalism, by the way?
I was at Time magazine in Delhi, and this would be the year 2007 or 8. My master's was in international relations, so I was kind of fluent into global negotiations of all sorts at the WTO, which used to be a big thing at that time, and also at the IPCC. And most of the coverage that I happened to come across in the international media, because that's what I used to track very closely because I was writing for Time magazine, was really about how India was being so stubborn about the role it should play in terms of cutting emissions. And that was really the mainstream narrative in a lot of places, of course, not in the Indian media. And I felt no one was really telling that story for the international audience. As far as I can remember, this was pretty much one of the first stories that I did very consciously as a climate reporter, a story about what lay behind India's quote unquote intransigence in global climate negotiations. This story got a lot of notice. A lot of people in India were certainly very relieved to see this point of view come out in a respected international publication. I made a lot of really good friends at that time, including wonderful people at CSC, for instance, which showed me that my editors certainly liked this kind of behind the scenes, untold storytelling. And there was a lot of appetite for it, not only in India, but internationally. People wanted to read what was going on and they weren't being presented with the correct picture. So that's really how it got started. And then a lot of people got in touch with their suggestions for stories that I should cover. I remember covering a very, very interesting story thanks to an organization that reached out called the Association for Religions and Conservation. When you stop to think about it, a lot of religions have a big role to play in conservation. Here in India, we're quite proud to say that the Vedas talk about environmental conservation. All of our religions, Sikhism, Buddhism, all of these have a tradition of placing a spiritual and divine value to nature. And also today, in a more sort of touch and feel, sort of more economic way, a lot of religious organizations, even sects, control a large amount of land, a lot of money, and large congregations. So the story looked at how some famous temples, such as the Golden Temple and the Tirupati Temple, had already, and this is about 17, 18 years ago, they were turning towards solar power for their kitchens, for instance, how religious leaders made a conscious effort. They could influence more people to be more ecologically, environmentally conscious. This was a story which again led to other interesting stories. We did a series, a feature on heroes of the environment. That's how it really got started. Then I was lucky to join an organization called BNA Incorporated, which was a very interesting model of journalism. It was an employee-owned set of publications based in Virginia in the US. It was a very happy place to work because it was employee-owned. And they ran about 100 titles covering mostly policy, legislation, and regulation from around the world. I got hired there to be the environment reporter from India. And this was the time, the year 2009, 2010 is when India's solar mission was announced. So a lot of very interesting changes were beginning to happen here. Solar mission, as I mentioned, and everything that followed, a lot of legislation, lawmaking, rulemaking on waste management, for instance, the whole renewable story, of course, pollution trading certificates, cap and trade schemes, energy efficiency. So a lot of very interesting stuff was going on, and I got a front row seat. Had the immense good luck of being almost forced to learn about environmental laws in India, almost doing a diploma. I came very close to doing it, but never took the exams because I had a baby to raise on the side as well. But all in all, it was brilliant initiation into the world of environmental reporting, because I also had fantastic colleagues from around the world whose work I followed, especially people from China, Brazil, and so on. So that's how I got in climate journalism.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Just for a second, if you stand aside from your role as a journalist and look at the state of environment affairs in our country as an individual, what is your opinion on where we stand?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to say that you wouldn't already know, but opinion is what you've asked for. So I do believe we are still at a stage where roti, kapda, and makan preoccupy most of us primarily. It's going to take a while until climate and climate action can be mainstreamed. And this is sad because so many of our traditional practices were so deeply rooted in maintaining a balance in terms of consumption, in terms of living with nature. So it'll be a while since we spent so long trying to dismantle perfectly beautiful systems to mainstream that conversation again and come to a stage where we're not having to single out environmental climate action as something separate. It can be a part of what we do in terms of our lifestyles and our lives.
We are on International Women's Day 2026, March 8th, and I'm pretty excited to be talking with someone who has a wide variety of experience working with international colleagues and climate action. So let's talk a bit about women in climate journalism. Is it a viable career to pursue, and what is it that is required for this profession?
Thanks for that question. I guess climate journalism is more of a viable career today than journalism per se. Um, nowhere in the world is it a good time right now. Be a journalist, and the reasons are many. At least in our country, we've never paid for news for our journalism, and today there's just so much disaggregation. Digital media was going to bring the barriers down to become a journalist, which it has, but it's also made the revenue stream completely disappear, so that certainly many journalists of my vintage are doing other jobs today. Many have left journalism. We've also had very difficult and polarizing environment, so it's not conducive time to operate as a journalist. So within that backdrop, it's actually a really good time to be a climate journalist, because there's a lot of interest within the country and around the world in what and how people are going to react, businesses, governments, communities, to all the threats that climate change brings to us, and all that we're also doing to further exacerbate climate change. And are we going to be able to stop doing that, stop living in that manner, and start taking steps to roll back some of that damage? So it's actually a really, really good time to be a climate journalist. And there are good publications where you can get published. There is a lot of interest in all kinds of storytelling from the community, from businesses, about technology, about policy. And really, it's a good time to get started here because it's still early days. Any good reporters, good writers who can connect the dots, both reflect what's going on and propose solutions out of this crisis, I think have a really bright future. What would it take to be a climate journalist? A lot of the best journalists are actually trained in environmental science. One of the journalists that I follow quite closely is Akshat Rathi at Bloomberg. He studied that at university. There are also smaller, shorter courses available in India, in universities and colleges, of course, but also at think tanks, through various organizations such as the Journalism Network, the Solutions Journalism Association, the Science Journalists Association of India. So lots of ways and avenues to educate oneself, to learn to connect the dots, and certainly more access to just information and learning material than we had during the time that we were training to be journalists. So I would certainly advise anybody looking for a career in climate journalism to read very, very widely, to cultivate domain expertise, as we would put it. Choose your beats within climate. It's a really, really vast story. And also cultivate some empathy that lies at the base of all good journalism. So tell these stories without moralizing or without grandstanding, without taking a moral high ground, virtue signaling. So I think the storytelling has to come from the right place, which is to help all of us do better and help change the systems that we all exist within.
Great. So what kind of career challenges you had while working in this area?
To be honest, and I realize just thinking about framing my answer, how lucky I've been, Venkat, honestly. I have not had very many career challenges. I'll explain how. I have had very understanding editors. Our son was born in the year 2012 when I was about 2 or 3 years into my job at Bloomberg Law. As I mentioned, I'm married to an army officer. He's no longer with the army, but he was at that time. So he wasn't living with us. And yet my editors reposed a lot of faith in me. They were okay if I moved cities as long as I could get the work done. I'm sure it would have taken a lot of understanding and empathy and patience at their end for the times that I had to maybe ask for a rain check or ask for a deadline deferment and so on. But I've had a really, really good relationship with most of my editors. I think the challenges that I faced were largely personal in terms of sometimes just being utterly knackered, holding down a job and raising a child and not having a spouse around. As far as my career is concerned, I don't think I've faced very many challenges being a climate journalist. There were tough times when I was managing editor at India Spend. Funding had dried up, but that was a difficult time for everybody across the board. So I wouldn't single that out as a career challenge for myself.
Okay. What about mental health or stress kind of challenges when you were involved in this line of work?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Covering any kind of crisis, and especially crises that are systemic in nature, which are long term, which will not get solved tomorrow, no matter how hard we try and what our intentions are, always take a toll. And I really felt the brunt of that during the pandemic, when for a really long time, the pandemic itself was the only story that was ever getting read anywhere. And we were a tiny team at India Spend, about 15 people, all spread across the country. And I think 3 or 4 people had losses in their immediate families. So that was a really, really tough time. Just staying focused on work, staying focused on helping each other and being there for each other as a team. I'm not sure I always knew what to do, but I do feel that some of us at least came through that time with very, very strong relationships and a lot of respect for each other, a certain level of affection for each other. Yeah, and I'm working again with some of those people who were there in my team at that time. So it is a challenge. I think it takes a certain kind of person who comes into journalism. So you are prepared for a certain amount of mental and psychological toughness. It does get very hard sometimes, but I think the best journalists are those who are able to spring back. I don't have a favorite journalist, but people that we all respect are journalists who've covered wars, who've covered crisis after crisis, and still been a voice that we want to listen to. How does one do that? I'm not sure. I guess having a good team and a very good support structure at work, and some people who understand, empathize, and have your back is really, really important. At the same time, cultivating your own natural reserves of patience and self-care, I think, are important. And I'm getting a little bit better at that as I grow older. When I was younger, I didn't pay so much attention to these things, but I'm very happy that the younger generation do.
From a women's safety perspective, how do you feel as a journalist? I heard that the field treats a women journalist different from a man journalist.
As a journalist, oh yes, God knows I've had my fair share. A lot of sexism, that's par for the course. We've had, thankfully, the Me Too movement and Priya Ramani's big victory. I think it's a victory for all women journalists. So yeah, sexism is par for the course. I don't know if it's getting any better, but I'd certainly hope so. But it also puts that additional responsibility on women leaders of newsrooms to know what's going on and not acquiesce in silence. Because if you look back at the time that this entire Me Too movement was about, we're talking about the 20 noughties, 20 teens, and of course all the years before that, whoever the predators were would not have been able to operate without other men knowing about it. Come on, everybody knew about it. Everybody kept quiet, which is a form of enablement, whichever way you try to spin it. So everybody at a level of responsibility and authority was implicit in what was going on. And I had to think about that now as an older woman. It makes my blood boil. But yeah, like I said, it's up to us now to make sure that we don't enable that. We are able to call out bad behavior and support other women, especially younger women. So yeah, sexism is definitely one big problem, and it also affects you in your daily work, even if it's not an incident. It's subtle. A male reporter can just go to the clerk and put their hand around the shoulders, their arm around the shoulders, and say, let's go for a smoke, and get good stories like that. But that avenue is never open to you as a woman journalist. Back when I started in the early 2000s, you were expected, if you were a young woman reporter, you were expected to start with lifestyle movies. And if you were reporting for the main paper and not the supplements, then maybe education and health. Very few women got to cover the political beat, for instance, police, law and order. That kind of thing ran. I think in smaller cities it's still true. it's still the case. So yeah, there's a fair amount of sexism. I also feel there's a lot of sexism from other women, and I'm not very proud of my own younger self as a boss when I tried to the head of a team to try to make no distinction between men and women, and I thought that was the right thing to do, and I still feel at some level that is the right thing to do. There was a person in my team who just had a baby. Now when I look back, I feel I could have been a lot more sympathetic, but at that time I didn't know any better, and I was trying to make sure the same rules apply to everybody. So I guess we all learn as we go and get older, but this sort of sexism, woman to woman sexism, is also very real. And not only that, I don't want to say women are always victims in any and every situation, but it is always much tougher. To get taken seriously is harder, to get the kind of positions that you aspire to is harder. And even when you get that position, you're just held to much tougher standards than a man would be. I think we allow a lot less freedom to women to show their anger than we do for men. And I'm talking about people in leadership positions here. You know, those from my time episodes of having a newspaper flung at your face are like kind of almost the rigor, right? From a male editor. But from a female editor, all you have to do is like raise an eyebrow and everyone will say, oh God, what a, you know. So yeah, I don't think it gets any easier. I do think you get a lot better at dealing with all of it. I think the only way out is again to fight your own battles, continue on your own journey, be there for others. I'm very happy to see there are associations now like the National Women in Media Association. They have each other's back in a great way. Community and friendships really see you through a lot. I do wish we were a little bit better at mentoring younger people, going a step ahead to maybe open doors for them, not just sort of provide an emotional shoulder to cry on or advice, but actually do the things that men have for generations done for each other. So yeah, there are a lot of challenges to being a woman journalist per se, but I feel things are just getting better. They're bound to.
Great, thank you. We have talked a lot about your work. Now let's talk about your hobbies and interests and what do you do for fun apart from work?
Yeah, I do a lot of things for fun. I've had stints of trying to learn several musical instruments. As we speak, I've got a ukulele and a keyboard in my room. I used to also have a drum set. So yeah, that's as far as music goes. I've tried to learn to sing. I used to paint. I don't have the time for that anymore, but I had a really good teacher and I got moderately good at it. I've done some pottery from time to time. I'm into fitness in a big way. I gym and I swim. Yeah, a new hobby I've developed is bird watching. I came upon this really nice app that I recommend to everybody who likes nature. It's called Merlin, and it helps you identify birds through bird song. So even if you can't spot a bird, you can't see it yet, the app will tell you this bird is in your vicinity, and then you can maybe make a little extra effort to spot it. And it's part of a large sort of citizen reported science sort of a project around the world. So you can play your part in helping scientists know which bird was spotted where in the world.
Do you strum the ukulele or do you play songs with it?
Yeah, strum sometimes. I've never gotten good enough to like just play an entire song, but I can read the music and play it. I actually did it quite seriously at one point of time during the pandemic. Actually, got to about grade 3 or 4. it's not great. Yeah, I'm still quite a rookie, but yeah, it's something nice to de-stress with, isn't it?
Do you have any societal issues that you would like getting addressed apart from sexism in journalism and climate action?
Yes, the one big issue that's occupying me and agitating me these days is how we've allowed social media to completely overtake young people's mind space and time. As we speak, the government of Karnataka has imposed a ban on social media for under 16s, and I think it couldn't have come sooner. But even AI and the way technology is progressing, if we can call it progress, the way it's moving ahead, I don't think we've factored in the societal ramifications. You know, as they say that regulation always follows technological advance because technology moves so fast. I think societal change only becomes evident years later also. And by then it's too late because the technology has evolved even further. So that's something that really worries me in terms of children's mental health, in terms of how they focus and relate to others around them, the access that they have to all kinds of things, which wasn't this easy at any other time in the past. Yeah, that's something that really worries me, and it's something that I would love to do something about.
Do you have any plans to do something about it?
Yeah, I tried to get a small WhatsApp group started in my son's school. I would like to take that further. I have been reading a lot about it, just haven't had, among all the other things that are going on, including the website that I want to launch. But I think this is one of the main ways that I would like to engage with my son's school going ahead. One main issue on which I want to engage.
Tell us about your website. What is it about?
It's a website called Climate Action Live. It's based on the premise that we're seeing a lot about climate problems. The crisis itself, that glaciers are melting and droughts are in the offing and heat waves. But we're not talking nearly enough about climate solutions, and certainly not talking about climate solutions in a way that would not induce climate anxiety, but would inspire action. From problem statement, I want my website working towards the goal of surfacing solutions, climate solutions. And I believe only journalism has the power to mainstream anything to a population scale. So going to make a very small start, but the intention is to be able to take these conversations to people everywhere in whatever format works for them. So social media, videos, text, deep dives, short stories, all kinds of formats to tell stories of solutions that already exist and how we can act on them, how we can adopt these solutions in our lives. Through that, let it snowball to a stage where these solutions are mainstream. All the problematic ways of doing things, all the problematic products, the ways of living that are not helping us or our planet will become history, and better ways of living and running the economy are going to get mainstreamed.
Pretty interesting. I ask this question to everybody that I do podcasts with about mass communication and reaching the huge amounts of population. What is your strategy that you have in mind to reach a large number of people?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Venkat. You see, for some time among journalists, there's been a realization that we need to step out and off of the page or the screen and be more actively involved in real life. For instance, people we might call citizen journalists or influencers to come across as authentic, to come across as somebody that people can relate to, be a part of conversations in the wider world. So what I'm trying to do with my website as well is, of course, we have the usual channels of distribution, as they're called. There's a newsletter, website, publish videos on YouTube, engage on the social media. But beyond that, I believe the kind of change they're trying to effect is going to happen through real life collaboration. And there's a lot of fantastic work going on in the climate space, but there's also too much duplication of effort, too many people trying to reinvent the wheel, and the cause is better served by just joining hands and coming together to build on each other's strengths. I would love to be able to create, to use a very corporate terminology, a multi-stakeholder platform where NGOs and government agencies and think tanks, residents associations, civic groups, students, businesses, everybody can come together to find something that's of interest to them and find ways of initiating and amplifying action. So that's the vision.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Do you have anything else to add? We are coming towards the end of the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's a really happy coincidence that we've talked on Women's Day, Venkat. I know we'd been scheduling and postponing for a couple of weeks by now, but yeah, I think it's a really happy day to have talked to you. I'll just make one quick observation. I did notice that a lot of our social feeds, at least mine, Instagram, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, had a lot more sensible Women's Day greetings than used to be the case in the past. There was a lot less about shopping. There was a lot more about camaraderie and just the kind of messaging that I think is now on point. So I do think that things are changing for the better. I feel very happy, very grateful to the women who went before me, and I feel very happy that a lot of us are being able to also carry forward the tradition, and that it's going to be a happier, more equitable, a more rewarding place to be for younger women.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that view. Thank you once again for making time to appear in the podcast and sharing your views. I wish you all the best in your life and whatever you are aspiring to do. Please take care and bye for now.
Thank you, Venkat. Thanks for having me.
Please take care. Bye.
Bye.
That was a great podcast with Madhur Singh. Please subscribe to this channel and follow it for more awesome podcasts. Opinions expressed by the guests in this podcast are their own. The host or the sponsors of the podcast do not condone the opinions expressed by the guests or the actions arising out of those opinions. Any decisions or actions that the listeners might take as a result of listening to this podcast must be based on their own judgment and will be at their own risk. The podcast host or their sponsors will not be held responsible for the consequences of any actions and or decisions taken as a result of any content in this podcast.